Welcome back to Starkiller Base. Today we have the second video of our Spirit of the Rebellion card analysis. We're going to be covering off the red hero cards, so let's get underway. So we'll start off with Baze Malbis, the crack shot. He's got 11 hit points. His dice show a 2 ranged, a 3 ranged for 1, a +2 ranged, 1 resource, and a special, and a blank. He's 14 points and 18 points for elite, and his special reads deal 1 damage to each of an opponent's characters. So this guy is pretty expensive. He's got 4 damage sides, although the special's not all that interesting if you ask me. He makes for some really good It's a Trap plays because he's got such big damage sides on him, although they do get a bit expensive with that 3 damage for 1 side. You can fit him in with elite with a Chewbacca, non-elite. You can go single die Baze with double die Leia. There's all kinds of options for him. He can also go single die with 2 8-point non-uniques or something like that, or paired with an Akbar or Mon Mothma. Obviously, you can put him outside and go with a 12-pointer like Elite Ray or Elite Snap and make for 4 dice for your starting pool, which is always nice. I haven't spent too much time with him, but he's pretty interesting. I prefer people like Leia to Baze, but if you put an Overkill on this guy, he can put out some pretty serious damage. Next, we have Mon Mothma, the skilled politician. She has 9 hit points. Her dice are a 1 focus, a 2 focus, a 1 shield, a 1 resource, a 1 resource, and a blank. And she is an 11-14, so she costs a little bit more for the non-elite version than Akbar, but other than that, they're very similar. Her character ability is what makes her shine, though. It reads, after you play an event, you may reroll a die of the same color as that event. So that is really interesting. You know, if you're running a deck and you've got a blank out and it's a red die and you happen to play Field Medic to heal somebody, you can then reroll that die for free. Or if your opponent's got a die out that happens to be red or yellow or whatever color of the event you play, you can play your event to make your position better and then reroll one of your opponent's dice. So let's say that you had her paired with a couple of hired guns, which I've seen before, which is a really good pairing, and you play an electroshock, and you get rid of a die, and your opponent's got a die that's showing some damage. You can reroll it and turn it up to a blank or a disrupt or something like that. So her die sides are very similar to Akbar's. Akbar's first die side is a 1 range instead of a 1 focus, and then I believe it's her 1 shield is a 1 discard. So aside from that, they're pretty much the same hit points, same elite cost, and everything like that. I really enjoy the pairing of Mon Mothma Elite with 2 hired guns. I got beat pretty badly in the finals of a tournament where Mon Mothma hired gun was using Planet Explosion and hit my Vader for 10, which was really unfortunate. But even without Planet Explosion, being able to use those focuses and reroll those dice with her abilities and that sort of thing can put on some serious pain, especially when you get those upgrades going out there like a bowcaster and some hold-up blasters and that sort of thing. So I'm really looking forward to getting Mon Mothma in my set and playing with her. I've got 1 die from the pre-releases, and I'm looking for a second so I can start building some decks with her. Next, we have the Rebel Commando. This one is the non-unique red character. 10 hit points. The die, it shows 1 range, 2 ranged, 1 discard, 1 resource, a special for 1, which is something we don't see much of, and then a blank. So it's a 10 cost for 10 hit points, which is pretty nice. The special reads, remove an opponent's die. So that's pretty good. I guess you can compare it to something like the On the Hunt special, where you pay a resource to remove a die. Admittedly, On the Hunt does allow you to remove all your opponent's shields from that character as well, which is, pretty significant, but having die control in a pinch is never a bad thing. Unfortunately, these guys, being heroes, don't get all of the cool stuff that villains get, like endless ranks, but you can put training on them and make them a pretty big beast, and there's a lot of characters like Luke that when you run them elite, you take up 20 points, so this gives you 10 hit points for 10 points and rounds out your deck. So they're pretty good. I've seen, I think it was New Brainer was playing Triple Rebel Commando and doing some interesting things with Wingman and Hit and Run and that sort of thing, and of course, it's nice to see another red die that has a discard side, so Commando Raid might even see some play. I doubt it, but you never know. I mean, it's better than having Akbar had a discard side and the Launch Bay had a discard side, and that was pretty much it. So moving on, we have Temmin Snap Wexley. This guy's a really interesting guy here. He has 8 hit points. His die is a 1 ranged, a 1 disrupt, a 2 disrupt, a 1 discard, 1 resource, and a blank. He is a 9/12, so he's actually cheaper than Ray, but has that 12-point elite version, which is really good. But what makes Snap really shine is his character ability. It reads, while at least one of this die is in your pool, your opponent must spend a resource in order to claim the battlefield. So you can build some really interesting decks that choke your opponent. I mean, Snap's dice do it alone, right? I mean, they've got 2 disrupt and 1 disrupt on them. So imagine if Temin's got a die out there and your opponent's out of money and can't claim. So you've got your battlefield sitting there, and you can keep control of the battlefield and use your dug-ins and your defensive positions and prevent them from playing theirs. And you can use the claim ability at your leisure. And as we'll see, one of the cards coming up called Planetary Uprising can do some pretty significant damage with a deck like that. So it's a pretty interesting one. I believe it was the Hyperloops was running Elite Snap with a Rebel Commando and a Rebel Trooper and doing some really interesting things. Frankly, any deck that has It's a Trap in it is a deck that makes me happy. So I'm looking forward to playing all these red hero characters and do some crazy shenanigans. Next, we have C3PO. He's a 1-cost support with a droid trait. His dice are a 1 focus, a 1 discard, a 1 resource, a 1 resource, and 2 blanks. So at first you look at that and you say, yeah, that's not very good. But when you read his action, you'll realize the true power of C3PO here. So it reads, action, remove this die to resolve one of your dice as if it were showing a different symbol. It keeps its original value. The first thing you can think of is something like, say, Snap rolls out a 2 disrupt and your opponent has no resources. You can just use C3PO's action to remove C3PO's die and resolve Snap's die as if it were range damage, or if your opponent has hunker down on it, change it to melee damage and take it out. If you need $2, change it to resources. That's cool. If you're playing a mill deck, you can use things like diplomatic immunity that you maybe used to run in a Padme mill deck and turn that 4 shields into 4 whatever you like. 4 discard, 4 range damage if you want to take out an opponent's character so that it makes your job easier for the rest of the game. But one thing that's really interesting is that blanks have a value of 0, and so do specials. So let's say that you roll out in a Poe deck. You roll out Poe and you get a blank. You use C3PO's action. You turn the blank into a special. You're resolving it. Boom. 0 to 0. So you can use Poe's ability and pitch a really powerful card, like the one that we're going to talk about next. But C3PO is a really, really interesting character, and I definitely would like to run him in some of my decks. It does slow things down because you have to roll the die out, and then you have to use an action to do it. But if you're running a deck that doesn't really care about speed all that much, or has things like Hit and Run and Wingman to speed it up enough that it can still use C3PO and claim, then even better. Next, we have a Ewing, which I was just saying is a really, really great Poe target. So this is a 5-cost support. It has a vehicle trait. Its dice show 3 range, 2 focus, 2 resources, and 2 specials. And the special actually gives you 2 options here. It says deal 2 damage to each of an opponent's characters, which is really great, or give each of your characters 2 shields, which can also be really great. Now, one thing that is interesting that you see people do with the Millennium Falcon is you discard it with Poe. When he's got 3 resources, you resolve the 2 resource side, and then you've got 5 resources, and because Poe's ability allows you to then pay to put a vehicle into play, if it was a vehicle that you discarded, you can do that with a Ewing. So you could get a Ewing in turn 1 just by taking a resource on Poe and rolling it in. Yeah, it's not going to hyperloop or whatever, but it's a really, really powerful die to get out turn 1. I mean, the special is basically like a repeatable thermal detonator. It's only 2 damage, not 3, but if you're running against, a 3-character deck, that's pretty huge. And if you're running a 3-character deck yourself, giving each one of them 2 shields is pretty great too, especially with all the Poe Maz that I keep seeing people play on TTS and that sort of thing. If you're worried about Poe throwing a thermal at you and you can give each of your characters 2 shields, that almost nullifies the entire effect of the card. So it's not bad. It's definitely an interesting card, and I think that it is going to see a lot of play because those die sides are bonkers. So next up we have the A180 Blaster. It is a 3-cost upgrade. It is weapon traded. Its die sides show a 2 ranged, a +2 ranged, a 1 disrupt, a special, and a blank. The specials give you 3 options, which is even more options than the Ewing. The first one is deal 1 damage to a character and give attached character a shield. Note that it does say attached character, so you cannot choose to give that shield to somebody else on your team. The second one says deal 1 damage to each of an opponent's characters, which is a mini area effect. It's not too bad, I suppose. And then the third one says deal 2 unblockable damage to a character. So the natural comparison when I see this is I would compare it to the IQA. They're both 3-cost ranged weapon upgrades that are red. The IQA is 2 ranged plus 3 ranged, a 1 disrupt, a resource, and a special. So it is slightly better in that it has 4 damage sides. I mean, effectively it has 4 sides that can do 2 damage. It is a bit lower end when it comes to things like, and it's a trap deck because you can't spin those die sides to a 3. But it is a more consistent weapon overall. With the advent of Imperial Inspection and that sort of thing, you may find that decks are going to start having their upgrade costs pushed up a bit higher than they normally would because they're tired of getting 2 cost or less upgrades returned to their hand every turn. Next we have Overkill. This one is one of my favorites of the set. It is a 2-cost upgrade. It is an ability, you'll note, not a weapon, which means that no one can disarm it, which is fantastic. Its die sides are +1 ranged, +2 ranged, +3 ranged, +3 ranged, blank, and a blank. So this one is pretty great. If you can come up with a deck that has a lot of black range damage sides, then this thing is godly. I mean, you naturally want to compare it to something like a jetpack. If you're playing it in an aggressive deck, the jetpack really only has 2 sides. It has the +2 and the +3, and the rest of them are okay, but you're not really looking for them if you're trying to kill something. So in that sense, Overkill is much, much better because it has 2 more damage sides, and one of them is a +3 as well. If you're running a deck that has a lot of focus, like a Leia Akbar, or it's a trap, Overkill is just ridiculous. You know, if you're playing Planned Explosion deck, then being able to set these to a 3, even if you're not playing and resolving the range damage, 3 on 1 die is a lot of the way towards the 10. I really like this one. I actually was playing my Leia Akbar deck and used a couple of the SoR pre-release Overkills in it and just used D6s for my sides because I just wanted to test it so badly before it was out on TTS here. And let me tell you, it does not disappoint. Next up, we have our first non-die card here. It is called Emergency Evacuation. It is a 4-cost event and simply reads, remove all dice. I don't know about this one. I can think of a lot of situations where removing all dice is really, really powerful, especially if I've resolved most of my dice and it can wipe my opponent's board like that. But good gracious, at 4 costs, I don't know about this one. I don't think it'll see a lot of play. I mean, it removes your dice as well, so you can't count on it as die removal if your opponent rolls a whole bunch of range damage out there and you've got dice out there that you want to resolve. It's 2 turns worth of resources to blow out an opponent's turn. I understand that it needs to be costed that high because of what it does, but I mean, it has a lot more than just a resource cost if you're losing your dice as well. Next, we have Friendly Fire. It is a 2-cost event. It says spot a red character to remove an opponent's die showing range damage to deal that damage to a character. So this is sort of like a deflect that costs twice as much but does twice as much damage. The costing twice as much part, of course, is the biggest problem because the cool thing about deflect is that you're paying 1 to remove an opponent's die and deal a little bit of damage, right? Now, I think the most important part about deflect is that you're removing the die. So if you can remove a die and do half the damage to a character for 1, is it really worth it to do the full damage for 2? I mean, I guess it is apples and oranges because this is a red hero and deflect is a blue. It's a nice card, and when it hits, it probably is really fantastic, but it's one of those cards where if you end up in a melee-heavy meta, then it's just a dead card. Next, we have Guerrilla Warfare. It's a 0-cost event. It has ambush, and it says remove 1 of your red dice to deal 1 damage to a character. It doesn't sound like that much, but it is 0 cost. It has ambush, so you can get to go again. If you're running a deck that has a lot of upgrades in it, you know, you can turn a scout into a damage. It's not too bad. The real question is, can you fit this card in your deck? Its effect is cool, and its cost is pretty cheap, but You know, with twice as many cards as we had in Awakenings, decks just really need to run those really good cards, and I'm not sure that this is one of them. Next we have Our Only Hope. It is a 2-cost event. It reads, draw a card. You may play that card for free or discard that card to gain 2 resources. So this card, when you look at it, it looks kind of strange. But if you built a deck that had a lot of expensive upgrades and that sort of thing in it, like a Poe deck, for example, this could actually really have a lot of synergy. You know, you're paying 2, you're drawing a card, and if that card costs more than 2, or, you know, I guess you could play it if it costs 1 or 0 if you really needed the card, but you're obviously going to be looking for something like a Ewing, or, you know, if you ran this with Finn, you could put an ATST in your deck or something like that. If you could pay 2 and put a Ewing in, that'd be pretty fantastic. And it even has that safety net where you can choose to discard the card to gain 2 resources. So if you did that, basically, it didn't cost you any money, and you just basically lost a card, but you drew a card. So all you've done is milled yourself by a card and then replaced the card in your hand. And you've gotten that much closer to seeing the cards in your deck that you want to see, I guess. I don't know. I think it's interesting, and when it hits, it's going to be glorious. But the problem is, if you're playing in a big tournament, it's not consistent. So it's a tough one. Next, we have Rebel Assault. It is a 0-cost event. It says, play only if you have 1 or more dice showing range damage. Remove an opponent's die not showing damage. So this one's a really interesting one. One of the problems I had in my Leia Akbar deck all the time was that I could use Dug In to get shields, and I could use defensive position to remove things that had 2 or higher on them. And, you know, you could dodge and block and all that sort of stuff. But what happens when your opponent has a Mind Probe special showing? Now you have a bit of an answer. You can use it to remove a special. Let's say you're playing against Vader Raider, and Vader's got a resource or a shield on his dice. I don't have a problem with paying nothing to remove Vader's resource side just to get rid of a Vader die so that they can't use Force Strike to do 3 damage or Bait and Switch to switch it from a resource to a 3 melee and hit me again. So it's an interesting card. It's cheap. The only problem is it suffers from the same issue that He Doesn't Like You suffers from. If you haven't rolled your dice in, you've got no dice to remove, right? In this case, it's a bit more limited than that because you have to have obviously got a die in there, but also it has to have a range damage. So if you roll in and you just don't happen to hit a range damage, what are you going to do? You're not using Rebel Assault, that's for sure. Next we have Sensor Placement. It is a 2-cost event. It says spot a red character to resolve an opponent's die not showing damage as if it were your die. So now we have a card that's even more focused on these non-damage sides. So, you know, it's one thing to be able to remove them. How about resolving them as if it was your die? Your opponent's got a Mind Probe special, and you go, hey, I'm going to pay 2 and smack you in the face for 5 with your own Mind Probe. How does it feel? Not only are you removing the die, but you're actually using it as if it was your die. So you get that double benefit to it, which is really great. And I mean, it is 2 costs, but if you're running a deck that can afford that sort of thing, then it's really darn good. I mean, it's basically like a reversal for non-damage sides. Next we have Spirit of Rebellion. It is a 0-cost event. It says give a character 1 shield or 2 shields instead if there's another copy of this event in your discard pile. So we see our theme from the Spirit of Rebellion here for some of these cards where you run 2 of them, and if you have 1 of them in your discard pile, then the card when you play it gives you an extra effect. The regular effect on this is not very good. I mean, it's basically a take cover. So having 2 shields if there's another copy in your discard pile is better, no doubt, but would you run this card? I don't know. I guess Qui-Gon can use it, but Red's got a lot more options for shields, and there's some shield hate in Awakenings, and things like Vibro Knife are going to make shields a lot less useful in Spirit of the Rebellion. Next we have Planetary Uprising. This is a 2-cost support. It reads, after you claim the battlefield, force an opponent to deal 2 damage to their characters distributed as they wish. So first thing I note is that it is non-unique, which means that you can have 2 of them out at a time, and when you claim the battlefield, your opponent has to do 4 damage to their characters distributed as they wish. So it has a similar effect to Emperor Palpatine's dice. If you are running a snap deck and you've made it so your opponent can't claim the battlefield, being able to have Planetary Uprising out and take your time and get the claim effect and make them take 2 or 4 damage is just bonkers. Not only that, but let's say that your opponent can claim the battlefield. Claiming the battlefield is always a game of chicken. I've got a resource out. Do I need the resource, or am I better off to be able to go first next round and get a claim effect? You know, you need to decide who's willing to give up more to claim that battlefield. Now, how much does 2 damage or 4 damage influence that on your opponent's side? Next, we have a 1-cost support called Spynet. This is one of the interesting supports that don't slow you down too much because it's sort of a reactionary effect. It reads, after one of your dice rolls a focus, you may exhaust this support to discard the top card of an opponent's deck. So this, to me, the first time I read this, I say I want to put this in a Padme mill deck. You get to do an extra mill from the top of your opponent's deck. You don't have to resolve the focus. You don't have to do anything with it. Just roll it. As soon as you hit a focus, boom. It's also non-unique, which means you can have 2 out there, and it's just doing the work for you. Lastly, we have a 0-cost upgrade ability called Tactical Aptitude. It reads, after you activate attached character, you may draw a card. Then place a card from your hand on the bottom of your deck. This one's kind of interesting. It allows you to cycle through your deck a bit faster, and the only downside to it really is that it takes up an upgrade slot. But I mean, if you see this thing early and you go, okay, well, this card in my hand is an endgame card. I don't need it right now. Say like a second chance when you got full health or something like that. Let's put it on the bottom of my deck and I'll draw a card. Maybe I can get some more die control or an upgrade I'm looking for or something like that. And you might say to yourself, whoa, I just put that card that I want later on the bottom of my deck. If it's on the bottom of my deck, it's going to be too late by the time I see it. But what happens when you use Tactical Aptitude 5 times or 6 times? All of a sudden, it's the 6th card from the bottom of your deck, and you know that you're going to see it at a certain point. I mean, you could almost, if you card count like that, you could actually tell exactly what you're going to draw into and go, oh, I need to get my second chance, and it's the 6th card on the bottom of my deck. So I have 8 cards left in my deck, so let me just make sure that I discard so that I have only 2 cards left in my hand, and when I draw 3, boom, there's my second chance, just like I planned. So it's interesting. I don't know that I would run it, but I could see how it would be an interesting card to play with. Between that and something like Maz's Castle, you can have a lot of control over where your cards are and what you see and what you get rid of. So this ends our coverage of the Spirit of the Rebellion Red Hero cards. I hope you enjoyed it. Keep an eye out for the next one coming in a few days. If you liked the video, please do like and subscribe, and we'll continue to bring you Destiny content. Thanks for watching, everyone.